didn't even know what a pest and building inspection was. So potentially could have bought a house infested with termites.
The naivety was our secret ingredient by the sounds of things.
Hello and welcome back to Property Now, where we are on a mission to make you the property pro in your group chat. Hey guys, we're back.
Hey, Saz.
Episode 2.
Great to be back.
Yes.
Good to be invited back.
Yeah, I almost didn't. I thought about it. So guys, what we're going to talk about today and what I really wanted to do, obviously last week it was all about the RBA and we had a lot to say on the topic and it was a great chat. This week I want to take a little step back and, allow our listeners a chance to get to know all of us a little better. I think a really good place to start would be your property journeys and specifically, your first property purchase. So I'm really keen to, hear from you guys about your experience in property.
All right. I guess I'll kick it off.
Yeah.
The year was 2010, November. Remember it really well. On that Tuesday that week in November, first week of November, the RBA actually increased rates by 0.25%. And that was a time when banks used to increase rates at a higher rate than what the RBA passed on. So I remember, I think the banks were passing around 0.35%. And it was an auction on a Saturday for a property that we didn't think we could afford. But I think because of that news, it really dented the sort of enthusiasm of the auction or the upcoming auction. So we bought a 3-bedroom house in the suburb of Lidcombe. And I think, the price was $555,000, right? $555,000. Still at the time felt it was expensive. But I think because of the RBA news, similar to today, it certainly dampens people's sort of enthusiasm, and confidence in buying something in the market. But the cash rate I think was 4.75 compared to 4.35 now. And lots of mistakes were made on that one. So first property. Didn't even know what a pest and building inspection was. Potentially could have bought a house infested with termites. Had no idea. Didn't get one done. Didn't know what.
You didn't though, right? The house was the condition.
The house is still okay.
Okay, good.
Right. We didn't get the contract review by solicitor. Right. Didn't have pre-approval. Right. So thought everything was going to be okay under the guidance of mum and dad. Right.
Being naive, is that what got you across the line? Because everyone else was pulling back in that decision, and then all of a sudden you're there buying no pest and build, I'm getting in, excited.
Yeah, look, I think it was just naive recklessness, and so at the auction, still remember really clearly that people were pulling back, bids weren't flying left, right, and centre, and we were actually surprised that we actually bought that particular property.
Yeah.
Did you know you needed to get a pest and building and get the contract reviewed, or you didn't do it, or you just didn't do it?
I'd like to say I knew, but I didn't. And I worked in the bank at the time, but Notting Home Loans, just to be clear, not to destroy my credibility. Yeah. But I was very fortunate, being able to buy it. I only needed a 10% deposit because one of the benefits, and I think it still is, when you work for the bank, you could borrow up to 90% without any mortgage insurance. And also, I think the main thing was that the loan amount was small. So even though I mentioned that the cash rate, for example, was higher than what it is today, and I remember interest rates for owner-occupied home loan, when I first got it was about 6.8, almost 7%. Because the loan amount was small, it was still manageable compared to today. So I think the average loan amount in New South Wales is now $790,000 or $750,000 approximately. So, because that's something that I often hear, that rates were high back then and this and that, but I think the loan amount makes a big difference.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And so your first property, 3-bedroom house, family home,
No, it was just myself at the time. Yeah, owner occupier. Yeah, correct.
Yeah. And you still
we're still living in it. So a few years ago we knocked it down. We built our forever home on it. And it's all because we were able to get our foot in the door, ride the wave of the growth of property prices that we can do, we can live in the type of property we live in today.
So you made lots of mistakes, you said, but it's actually now the site for your forever home.
Yeah.
So the pest and building didn't matter. You knocked it down.
It actually had termites.
That's right. So it was very fortunate, now
beautiful.
that I look back in hindsight, because I don't think we'd be able to buy something similar to what we live in today without going under, massive financial pressure or having to worry about that the bulk of our income is going to go to the mortgage repayments and so forth.
So that was 10, what? 10,
That was
12 years
2010, so 13 years ago. Yeah.
So without knocking it down,
Yeah.
what would that same property be worth with the original house today?
Yeah, sure. There's properties being sold on the street. They're probably worth about $1.3 to $1.5 million.
Wow, so pretty much 3 times, close to 3 times.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, unbelievable. And I think with the increase in the value of the property, it's also allowed us, before we knocked it down, we could renovate and stuff like that. Use the equity to invest, buy a car and all that sort of stuff. So that just really goes to show that, that property and the value of property, the equity, also has financial benefits or non-financial benefits for other things that you can do, right? So, yeah, very lucky.
The decision to buy at the time, was it, where did it come from? Was it something you always wanted to do? Was it something your parents?
Oh, yeah, not at all. For me, it was just parents, literally parents. I think as soon as I got a job out of uni, that was their goal for me. That's why I didn't know any other things I needed to do, even though I'm buying the property, such as, building pests, solicitors, finance, all that stuff I didn't know. And it was actually a property that my dad saw while having strolls on the street, walking around the neighborhood.
Go Dad.
So completely driven by them. Yeah.
So you bid at auction? Were you looking at any others, or was that the first property you bid on?
That was the first one.
So you did no research on anything else? It was like your dad went for a walk one day. He's like, son, you need to buy a house, and I saw this one, and you went and bid.
100%.
Wow.
That's and it's funny enough, we see clients go through that even today. We see a lot of our young customers where the parents are the ones dictating when they should buy, what property they're buying, and they're just kind of on the bus for the ride, even though they're buying it for themselves.
But back then it was different too. Like today, there's podcasts about property, and there's all these forums and websites and all these different like prop tech apps and whatever. Back then there wasn't as much guidance back then. So to do the research, you literally had to buy like property magazines or speak to certain agents. It wasn't like it is today.
Yeah, absolutely right. So even though I worked in the bank, right, my job wasn't doing home loans, but even in that sort of environment, I didn't know much at all about buying property or about the importance of getting on the property ladder and what sort of benefits that it can deliver later on in the future as you ride the wave of the growth of the property, right? So had I known that earlier, or had I known that even after I bought the property, I would have done other things differently as well.
Yeah,
So even after I bought the property, I still didn't know a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, like, it sounds like when you bought your first property, the way I'm seeing it, like everything kind of came together really, really well. Your dad saw this property and, you might not have done the inspections or this and that, but everything sort of worked so well to the point that like you still live there today. You spoke a little bit just then about like things you would do differently. Do you think there's any sort of like mistakes maybe you made or things that you would change if you could sort of have your time over?
Yeah, look, definitely. If I was to do it again, I'll definitely go and seek professional advice, right? For example, speak to a mortgage broker, speak to someone at the bank, do research. Well, at least understand what the process and the steps are to make sure. I mean, fortunately, there wasn't any issues with that particular property, but we see issues all the time, every day, right? For example, we're talking about termites. There could be that. There could be easements or issues with the property that you can't do certain things in the future. So I use my example that we knocked our property down and rebuild, but there could have been restrictions that I couldn't build anything, right? So we didn't know any of that stuff, right? And that was just the lack of education. So I would say I'll fully educate myself and understand all there is to know before making a massive decision.
So who would you say the main parties to help with that education? Would you say like a lawyer or a conveyancer to help on the legal side of things? Pest and building inspection, you'd do that again, I guess?
No, 100%.
The finance side of things, you're a broker, so you'd probably say a broker, but would you go to your bank or a broker to get some financial advice to help you out on the lending side of things? So would they be the three main groups that you'd look at? And obviously the legal could help on the easements and any issues with the property.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think nowadays you're spoiled for choice, right? Is that, you can get advice and guidance from all of those people, and I think a lot of them will know something about the other professions as well. So it's not as if, let's say, the solicitor is only going to give you advice on the legal side of things, right? Or the mortgage broker is only going to give you advice on the best interest rate or the best product, right? So a lot of mortgage brokers actually give a lot of the customers the step-by-step processes and guidance, not necessarily going into detail on different expertise, but they can give you a really good overview of what to expect or what questions to ask, right? Because I think the danger is you don't know what you don't know. So even somebody mentioning something, then for you to later on go and find out and seek more information, especially on the internet, you can get an answer for any question you put in, right? But if you don't know what question to search for, that's the issue, right? So I think, definitely get as much information as you can. And I often think that people do more due diligence buying a car than they do on buying a property, which is, 10, 20 times more in value. Yeah.
I think the biggest lesson, though, if my kids are watching, is listen to your parents, because, good will happen if you listen to
Got all that knowledge.
I listen to them all the time.
Thank you, Jace.
No worries.
That was awesome. Chris, you want to tell us about your
I'd love to
property
dig in a
journey?
little bit. It's actually a similar time to when you purchased. So I was in February of 2011. I'd actually been working for a few years and not on a very high income at the time. So I was a cadet working in an accounting practice. I think it was only about 32,000 or 33,000 at the time. So not a really high income for any means to buy property. But there was a property that I bought in Southwest Sydney, so in Blacktown. Still got the property today. But I remember at the time there was 3 properties that came up next to each other, and it was a deceased estate, a lady that had owned them for 4 or 5 years. And the first one had just sold at 275,000. The other 2 were available. I remember speaking with the agent at the time. So I was always looking for property at the time. My brother had just finished purchasing one of his properties, and I was trying to get onto the property ladder, as parents very heavily pushing us into property, and found the middle property that the lady was looking to sell. And I remember negotiating back and forth with the agent, and it was a similar time. It went to auction, got passed in. There was just no one wanted to transact. And we're talking properties in Blacktown, which is worth 250 to 350 in that sort of range, and ended up negotiating and finalising the purchase of the property for 292,000. I can tell you from now, at the time I had no clue what I was doing in terms of negotiating, right? So I thought I had done the deal, all done. I went to the agent's office to sign at 292,000, and then I get into the room to sign the contract. Again, I didn't get a legal person to look at it either. I didn't get a pest and building. The pest and building was a reason for that, because we knew we could fix the property if it wasn't too bad. And then I remember the agent left the room, and I'm sitting there thinking, what the hell's going on? And he came back and said, look, we've got another offer for 294,000. And I'm like,
Oldest trick in the book.
right? So at the time, you don't know. And I'm like, okay, what do I need to do to get it? And he goes, 295 and you should be okay. So I said, okay, all right, 295. And at the time, you're talking like it's a big increase into the purchase price. But ended up going ahead, securing it, locked it away. That was a 3-bedroom fibro house in Blacktown on a 560 odd square meter block. Really, really good asset. But I didn't have the deposit at the time. So I, again, earning 33,000 per annum, couple of years into the workforce, studying full time as well at nights. So I didn't have that deposit saved, but knew I wanted to get into property. And the parents, I was very fortunate that I could actually have my parents to go guarantor for me to help. So what that means was I had 2 loans basically on the property to help on the LMI. So I had to pay LMI because I wasn't in the banking sector. Yeah. But I had to have 2 loans. So there was 80% loan on the house, and there was what's called a guarantor loan. I think that's what they call it.
Yeah, that's right.
20% on my parents' house. So then I was able to borrow basically 100% of the purchase price. So at the time I had a really good, she wasn't a broker, but she worked in the branch at CBA. And her name was Carol Dodds, and she was amazing. She gave us some amazing advice to us. She actually gave me the idea on the guarantor loan, how to actually structure. So shout out to Carol. Thank you very much for that. And I think it was really that learning phase. So I had a really good mentor within Carol, and she actually guided me for a few years after that to help me on the property journey. So she helped me structure the first loan to be interest only, and then the guarantor loan to be principal and interest. Pay that one down really fast, as much as you can, and then the idea was if the property increased, to refinance mum and dad out. Which, to credit to Carol's strategy at the time, I think 2 or 3 years after that, I managed to refinance mum and dad out. The property had gone up a little bit, refinanced them out, had a bit of an additional income, and it was a really, really good experience to actually go through that and that learning. But that was learning in the trenches. Like, again, you talk about information coming out in education. There was no information apart from the people around you that had either done it, learned from their mistakes.
But you had some great advice.
Yeah.
And you were probably an early benefiter of what is now known as the Bank of Mum and Dad,
yes,
right? That's
I was.
Literally the description of the Bank of Mum and Dad.
Yeah.
Being able to do that. I'm imagining you negotiating. Was it just you by yourself negotiating? You said your brother bought a house recently, or your parents were obviously helping you Bank of Mum and Dad wise. Was anyone else in the room with you?
So no, there wasn't. So mum and dad, like, very keen on property, pushing us, but they weren't there, like, holding our hand, helping us negotiate, doing all that. They just wanted us to buy property. After that, you got to figure it out how to do it.
Yeah, right.
Which I liked, because I wouldn't want them to take the reins or do anything. So we had to sort of figure it out, make our own mistakes.
They just had that influence, like they reminded you it was important.
Correct.
And
Correct. So having that pushing us to then, how do we actually get to the next stage and buy that property? Then a few years down there, so still got that property to today. What I wanted to do was, and this might be a bit of a tip, was to add value to that property. So it was an investment property, and it's still rented out, but it had a huge old pool in the backyard. And then there was a new government scheme, I don't know exactly when it came out, that could allow you to build what's today known as granny flats on the back of properties. But I had this pool, and it was, a 560 square metre block with this ginormous old school concrete pool that took up the whole backyard. And I remember speaking to Dad saying, what the hell are we going to do with this pool? Like, it was a problem. Like, whenever we rented the front house out, we had people not wanting to rent the house out because of the pool, because no one wanted to take care of the pool. So we're like, well, let's just fill it in and not fill it in, but get rid of the pool and build a granny flat. And we figured out that you could get more income, we could create more housing supply, which we know is a big issue now. But, it was a great outcome to actually put a granny flat on the back. So at the time, I think this was 2014, I was able to put a granny flat on the back and have 2 incomes from that same property. And, it's been a really, really good outcome, the granny flat side.
You think the granny flat is the genesis? Because obviously before you founded Coposit, you were a developer. Was building that granny flat like part of that genesis?
It was, actually. Yeah. That could be a story for another day, because I had a really bad experience with the granny flat builder at the time. So we engaged a builder to do the granny flat who... I was probably one of the more fortunate clients, but the granny flat builder went into liquidation when we were basically at completion. But there were some other people that the granny flat builder went into liquidation when they were at like the slab stage. So, very difficult time for that builder to be going under. But yeah, look, that development was a really interesting part of the whole puzzle to start the journey on. Okay, you've got a piece of land. How can you add value to that piece of land, get higher income? If you get higher income, then all of a sudden you introduce the idea about property yields and what that means for lending. And this is all part of like the natural evolution of my property journey. So it started off with having no idea about how to even, what the agent was doing at the time for negotiating, right? To all the way out to adding value to a property and realizing, the customer or the tenants, right, what they want in a property. So, they want good amenities close to shops, to station, to schools. At the time, I had no consideration into schools, shops and stations.
And they want no pools, which is,
pools.
Who would think?
I would love a pool these days. Yeah.
Really interesting that you guys both jumped in, and I was the same, right? Spoiler alert. But jumping in with very little knowledge. Yeah. A lot of people procrastinate. Oh, is this the right area? And it's good to do your due diligence and research, right? But sometimes just getting in is important. So once there's probably a level of research that you do, and is there a tipping point where it's like, okay, I'm procrastinating now, like I need to make a move?
Well, yeah, I mean, I remember when I left the office and I was telling people I'd bought the property, and I told them what had happened about that $3,000 incident. And at the time I felt like an idiot, right? I felt like I got taken advantage of, and I probably did. But you look back now and you're like, well, that's part of the experience and that's part of the journey.
Yeah.
But again, so talking on the income levels, right? I was earning $33,000 and the property was roughly $300,000. That same property today is worth, you know, if you're using round numbers, $1 million. And that same job, you'd probably be getting 45,000. So, you know, you're talking what it was 10 times income is now 22 times income.
Yeah, $3,000 in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound too bad.
Yeah. I guess it was the experience of that. So.
Yeah. No, it's Michael's point as well, because like the common theme here is that, you know, you guys, it's not that you got lucky. Like there was a lot of hard work and you know, all these other factors involved. But for me, I'm like, I've been thinking about, you know, purchasing a property for quite some time. But I have that voice in my head, that sort of procrastinator that's like, no, you don't know enough about this. Or if you don't know 100% about something, if you don't have all the information, if you can't see what the property value is going to be, all these variables that some of them you can know. You can get on Google and what inspections do I need? Who do I need to speak to? But all those things kind of put off that decision for me. And I'm sure for a lot of people as well. You kind of think, well, hang on, this is a big decision. This is a big thing to be doing. But
it's very scary.
Yeah.
Look, it is a massive commitment. At the end of the day, you're getting a mortgage, you're taking a long-term view, it's buying property. So it is a massive commitment. And there are other risks, like if you lose your job, you know, you got to still pay the mortgage. So I understand it. It's definitely a huge commitment. And even when, like, talking on how my parents went guarantor, at the time it was, what, 70,000 odd to go guarantor. Today, if they were to do that with that same property, they're talking 300,000 with stamp duty to go guarantor. So it's a very different scenario now. So I actually understand why there's hesitation.
You mentioned stamp duty. None of us knew what we were doing when we bought our first properties. We didn't know what a pest and building was, Jace.
Yeah,
You're saying,
exactly.
Did we know what stamp duty? Like,
No
all of a
idea.
sudden it's like, hey, also there's this extra bit. maybe an explanation for
Absolutely.
What is stamp duty?
what is stamp duty.
Had no idea that when you buy property in the state, you got to pay a tax, right? So back then, my understanding of tax was only through the income, right? You have to pay tax on your income. So I didn't know you have to pay tax when you buy property. But that's essentially what stamp duty is. But that's where you find out these things as it progresses. So it's not as if we had planned and budgeted, this is how much deposit we have, so forth. And it, you know, you find out from the solicitor, hey, do you have the money for stamp duty? And that's when we're asking the question, what's that? Right? And then you got to find that money. And, you know, so that's where it does make it difficult. I mean, it turned out great, but, you know, so I think definitely if I could do it again, I'd rather know what's involved,
know up front.
what the processes are, do my numbers. But you also make an interesting point around that, you know, there's heaps of information now as well.
Yeah.
And that can sometimes, you know, stop
Overload.
you or making a decision.
Information overload. It's
Correct.
probably, maybe that's too much information is
Yeah,
stopping them from making a decision. But at the same time, you do need to know
that's right.
everything that's
Yeah.
going on. Like, for example, they had the pool. At the time, you had to get compliance for pools. I didn't know anything about that.
Yeah.
When I bought the property, I had to do all these compliance items.
Yeah.
What, so it wasn't built with
No,
compliance in
it
mind?
was built, but it didn't have a fence. So I needed to put a fence in.
Oh, right.
So it was all
Yeah.
and had to get certificates for the pool if I wanted to rent it out for insurance purposes. So again, I didn't know about this until I had purchased.
Your mindset at the time, were you like, oh, I shouldn't have done this? Were you
Well,
like stressing out?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
well, so I thought I got ripped off another $3,000, which I probably did, and I thought that, you know, what the hell is this pool? It needed a bit of renovations, the house too. So, like, I probably didn't fully realize what I was getting myself into.
Mm.
Yeah.
But again, it's hindsight. So you look back now and you go, "Oh, it was a great decision." But
At the time, maybe
yeah,
not.
at the time, I wasn't thinking that.
Yeah.
There was probably a 6-month period where like, this is hard.
Yeah.
Like this, it is hard, and
I think that's encouraging in itself, though. You know what I mean? Like, not like to have these successful property purchases and things that worked out well. Pardon me, for every good story, that I'm sure there's a lot of bad stories out there, and there's situations where it doesn't go so well. But knowing, you know, yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy. And 13 years on, you can look back. Both of you, pretty much 13 years on,
Yeah,
look
about
back
that.
and say, yeah, I didn't have all the info, and I probably made a couple of mistakes there, but
and a lot of sacrifices too. Like I probably to this day I still haven't been on like a huge overseas trip or anything like that. It's because I'm committed to, like, you're committed to that. It's a lifestyle choice, right? So I couldn't actually do those.
My face is saying it all. I'm like, you need a holiday.
But
I actually couldn't.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
If you wanted to, like, all I had in my head was got to pay mum and dad.
Yeah,
like, I wanted to get my parents off.
Yeah.
They had done me such a favour to do this for me, so I wanted to repay the favour by repaying them literally.
It's possible.
Yeah.
But because you have that loan as well, right? So from the income that you're earning, you know, after you pay the repayments, even though it's an investment property, you got rental income coming in, the focus is actually paying down the debt, you know, and that's like forced saving, right? So the principal you're paying down is you actually saving the money and going back into the property, right? So I think that's also an interesting thing to know, that it changes your mindset. You know, you don't have the option, do I have 50,000 sitting in the bank account I can go and have a nice holiday, or do I
I would have loved to have gone on.
Right? Yeah.
Well, I think that's a thing that, you know, at least people in my circle, my friends, my family, even my little sister, you know, she's 20 and she's 20. I wasn't thinking about buying property when I was 20. You guys probably were, but I wasn't. But, you know, she said, we were chatting about it the other day, and she's like, well, you know, I'm never going to buy a property because I care too much about having the freedom to do these holidays or do these things that, you know, add value to my life, and property just isn't it. And I feel like it's a bit of a recurring or a common sort of theme with people her age, you know, people that I speak to around that age, that they don't see the value in it. But I think it comes from family a lot too.
Do you think they don't see the value, or they might be thinking it's just too hard?
Too hard, yeah.
I think
it's interesting too. I was speaking to a 30-year-old today, and he said all of a sudden, all his friends are talking about, oh, I've got to buy a property. Like, it just switched all of a sudden. Yeah. So they've been like, you know, going out, traveling, having fun, because they're living their life. And I think a lot of, you know, for us, it was maybe a bit different. I mean, we're not too much older than 30, but it was a different time. You know, it seemed achievable, or maybe we were just listening to our parents at the time. But I hear a lot of, like, all of a sudden it's like there's this switch. It's like, okay, I'm ready to settle down. I need to buy something, because people realize it's, you know, even if it's just you're not a property investor, buying your own home and paying that off by the time you retire, it's a massive asset that if you don't have it by the time you retire, that's when it's going to be difficult. You guys, my story's similar to you guys in many ways, in that bought around about the same time, bought in Western Sydney, I bought in Bosley Park, similar sorts of price points. What I envy about your stories is that you guys still own those properties, because I sold my first property, and it's something I think about every now and then. Like, where would I be if I didn't sell that? But I think that's normal as well. I think the message that I want to sort of impart with my tale is that there are many pathways you can take, from selecting the property to, once you're actually there, what you do with it and what happens after that. I don't know anyone that hasn't bought a property and said, oh, I wish I didn't sell that, or I wish I bought this one, or I wish I did this. So everyone has that story. There is no one on earth that has purchased property, right? So that's important to know. But I bought at the time, when I purchased with my brother. We bought together. We pulled our deposit together and we purchased together. And he's 2 years younger than me. We're probably about maybe 22 and 20. He's 2 years younger than me. And at the time, for me, that's the first thing, right? I think back now and go, man, I could have probably purchased on my own, because I put together probably a majority of our deposit, and he eventually sort of evened it out, which was totally fine. But what he did for me, we helped each other, because he was just getting into real estate at the time. When you start in real estate, you're in the leasing team. Yep. So he would literally knock on the door every month and collect a check. That's how old we are. He'd collect a check every month. So, you know, he'd
bring the goat around as payment.
Yeah, and I think back now and I go, with the knowledge that I have now, I go, man, I could have done that on my own. You know, I should have done that on my own. Yeah. But then I go back to like 20-year-old me and go, man, this is like massive. Like, I'm buying a house. Like, how can I do this by myself? Yeah. So we purchased together. And we eventually sold probably within the 6 years. And it was what was very interesting was, at the time, we're having a discussion about, hey, maybe we can build a granny flat here. It was probably 60 to 80 grand to add a granny flat at the time, extra income. And we're almost positively geared, right? This is why we should have kept it. Massive mistake. We should have kept this place. But emotionally, it was a different story. I had met my wife. or now wife, we were getting married and we were planning our next step. So for us to buy our family home, our first family home, I needed to get some cash. And it's very hard when you buy with someone else. So, and that's what happened. And we sold and we made a little bit of money. But of course, if we kept onto it, if we held onto it, it would be worth a lot more now. And I'm sure even my brother, we've had conversations where he's like, man, I wish I bought you out and built the granny flat, you know? Yeah. So you always have those moments.
Those property regrets.
Everyone has property regrets.
But that links back to the education, right? Because, you know, that's a really common sort of structure where people buy property with their siblings and so forth, right? But what I find is whenever they're doing that, there's that missing gap where whoever's responsibility it is, you know, whether that's the mortgage broker, the solicitor, or whoever, they don't talk about what happens when you need one person wants to sell.
Happens,
when life happens, or you meeting your now wife. How does that affect your borrowing capacity?
That's right, yeah. So we didn't know that.
Yeah.
We just knew we had to get in.
That's right.
Again, my parents doing the right thing.
Yeah.
You know, come on, boys, you got to buy property. It's for your future. And you know, so we looked around a little bit, but at the end of the day, my uncle who was in real estate was like, hey guys, I found a place for you. Like, come and check this out. And you know, so there was limited research, but there was a bit, but we didn't know all of that. And I think if I was to go back now, I don't think selling was necessarily wrong for the reasons that we sold, but I think I would have sat down and had a plan. Because if we knew going in that, hey, if I spoke to my brother and said, hey, so we're never going to sell this place, we're just going to build a granny, like if that was our plan, and then maybe I got married a year later or something, like if that was our plan, then it would have been fine. But we never discussed what the plan would be if life would change. Yeah. So look, and look, it's certainly I don't think it was a mistake. I'm glad we got in when we did, and but you know, I think back and go, wow, I could have, you know, had as many properties as Chris and Jason. No, I'm just kidding. but it was certainly a different journey.
Yeah.
So do you reckon if you didn't sell that property, you'd be able to buy the one with you and your wife?
Yeah. Look, it's hard to say.
Could you have kept both?
The strategy may have been different. You know, maybe we would have gotten married a year later or something like that, which I don't know how that would have went down at the time, to be honest. I don't know, but maybe we could have because later on in life we chose to rentvest because I started working closer to the city and we always wanted to live in the inner west, so we decided to rentvest for a little while. So maybe that could have been an option earlier, and then we could have, you know, my brother and I could have continued to build a portfolio together or something along those lines, you know. So there's probably, you know, I try not to think back at what could have been. I try and think at what could be next. So I don't dwell on those things. But we certainly could have, like I said at the beginning here, there's a number of pathways you can take. And you're probably always going to think you took the wrong one, to be honest with you. Every property owner is like, I should have done it this way. Should have bought that place. Shouldn't have sold this place.
Just like the same sentiment that you think every property you buy is very expensive.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, well, whether you bought it for 290,000 odd, you know, whether it's 550,000, every time you buy a property, even today, you'll think that it's actually really expensive. And then in hindsight, 5-10 years later, you know, you're glad you did that, because I think that's where the importance of getting on the property ladder so you can actually benefit, you know, from these price increases or growth.
I suppose it's the time heals, right?
Yeah.
So you've got the time that the property value increases, the capital growth comes into play, and all of a sudden that property you bought 10 years ago, you look like a genius. But really, you haven't done all that much. It's just capital growth.
Yeah.
But now it is very difficult now to have that same strategy in place. Yeah.
The hardest part's to start, right? And the strategy probably changes today. Like no one spoke about rent vesting 20 years ago.
So on that.
Yeah.
So what's rent vesting? Just so for some of the listeners that might not know what rent vesting is.
Rent vesting, quite simply, is owning an investment property where you can afford and renting a home where you would like to live. Now, and that sounds very simple, but it's very difficult in that maybe where you can afford, the rent that you're earning from that is a lot less than what you're paying where you want to live. So there's a lot of factors that you need to look into. But I guess at the end of the day, it's a way to get into the market, but also, you know, not have to live at home or be able to rent where you want to live and all that sort of thing. So that's it in a nutshell.
Okay.
And it's increasing in popularity as well.
There's more and more,
Yeah.
like rent vesting has become a thing
So
in the last 6 or 7
like
years.
you want to live close to the city, or you want to
Yeah,
live
close to work.
close to work,
Close to
but
the-
you might buy a regional property.
Mm.
So you've still got your foot on the ladder or
Yep.
in the property door.
I've got friends that like they wouldn't own, you know, they rent where they want to live, but they own properties interstate, you know, properties
Yep.
that they've never seen and probably never will.
But what's interesting, right, with that? So, Jason, you asked me a question before about, you know, what would you do differently, or would you have, you know, would you have gotten the advice, you know, could I buy a second house
Yeah.
with my wife
Yeah.
later on down the track? If you're thinking about rent vesting, you've got to ask questions like that as well, because when you get married, or if you get married and if you have kids, then all of a sudden what you find is you want to be in walls that you own, or you want to make sure that you're close to the schools that you want your kids to go to, and that's a 10, 15-year commitment where you know the suburb that you're growing your family up in. So all of a sudden rent vesting is a good idea. It can be a good idea. It can be a solid strategy, but you got to ask yourself, do I want to be able to hang a picture on this wall without asking someone else if I'm allowed to do it?
Yep.
Do I want to send my kids to this school at the risk that, you know, they're going to jack up the rent by $100 a week and I'm going to have to look for something else?
Yeah.
So all of these sorts of questions that you might not think about in the beginning, you probably should be asking those questions as well.
Yeah, that's funny you mentioned that, because this week I saw a post on Reddit talking about that. You know, someone was asking, what's the point of trying to save up, buying a property? The interest rates are so high, your repayments are so high, you're paying so much to interest. You know, it sounds like someone who's, you know, kind of given up on the idea of owning a property, right? And maybe seeking validation, you know, online to see what other people think, right? And, you know, there are some people that agree, but there are also a group of people that were commenting things like that, right? You know, what you're paying in terms of having a mortgage is being able to hang that photo on the wall without having to ask any permission, not to deal with property managers and leasing officers, and not having your privacy invaded. If the landlord wants to sell the property, got to do open homes, right? All that sort of stuff. And it makes sense, yeah.
And I think the big part which a lot of people miss is buying a property today, the generational wealth that it can cause down the track, and for your retirement, it's so important. You know, if you rent in a suburb for 40 years, your rent is going to continuously go up. But if you buy that property, come when you finish, you know, get to that retirement age and you're not working any further, you're still living in that suburb with a higher rent. So you've got to figure out how you're going to continue to pay for that rent down the track without owning that property. That's where, you know, you talked on that earlier with the retirement side of things and the generational wealth that property can create for you. I think that's probably the biggest risk that people face without buying property. Yeah. In the long term. But I guess, you know, and I always am a big advocate of saying you should be buying property with a long-term view. But, you know, if you're 25, you're not really thinking about what's happening at 65, 70 years old.
Hard to have that long,
I completely agree.
picture.
Like, I don't even think about that side of things now. So...
Yeah, but that's where I think sometimes, you know, when it comes to government policy, you know, all that macro stuff, right? Not necessarily rely on the individual to always think about that, but to have that environment where that's a possibility, it's easier to do that. You know, it's not as difficult to own a home or to have policies in place that makes or addresses that issue, that you can foresee into the future that there's going to be a generational gap between people who own property and passing it down to their kids, or helping their kids to bank of mum and dad buy property, versus parents who are renters who don't have that capability to support their kids to purchase. So then their kids will be renters, and then generational thing will continue.
There's a divide that
right?
keeps
Yeah,
growing.
so it's like going back to the medieval days, like you're either landowner or you're not a landowner, right?
It's almost like someone should create a product to help Australians.
Here he goes.
Get into the property market.
No sponsors
Sorry.
for this podcast. I think we can go on some tangents, hey? We're talking about our first story and there's all these problems we need to solve. I'm interested in throwing it over, like Zaz, our host, we've put our hearts on our sleeve. We've told you the mistakes we've made, the journey we've been on. As a aspiring first home buyer, what are you going to do knowing what we've done wrong What can you do
Pest
now?
and building.
I've got all the tools now. Right? I'm just going to go buy a property.
Don't
No.
wait, just do it. Listen to your parents.
yeah.
Listen to us, your parents.
No, I think that, you know, having that courage or that confidence, you know, and I am, you know, lucky to be in a situation where I'm, you know, I do have the support of family and friends around me. I know lots of smart people in the property industry.
You just looked at Jason there, but that's
yeah.
all right. We're okay.
Obviously.
She meant people, just people.
But yeah, I think like having that, like knowing to just kind of pull the trigger. But you know, it's like what Jace was saying, like it can, with all these big issues going on, like housing affordability, or you read pretty much any headline at the moment and it paints a pretty grim picture.
So what is the one thing holding you back right now, or even the last 5 years from buying property? Is it the headspace in the last 5 years haven't been in, or is it? So it sounds like you want to buy.
Yeah, definitely.
So what's the one thing holding you back?
Well, you'll love this, because the one thing is I don't have the money for a deposit. Like I don't have, you know, if looking at prices I've been looking at around a mil is kind of the budget that I would go to. And I don't have that money put aside, and I save, and, you know, unlike Chris, I do go on big holidays. So there's definitely areas where I could, you know, pull in the reins and tighten things up. But yeah, it's that having all that money there to put towards a deposit on a property.
But that's the other issue, right? Is that even if you save at the moment, and that's a challenge for a lot of first home buyers, is that because the rate that the prices are going up.
Yeah.
You know, so I think there's a lot of first or aspiring home buyers out there who are cutting back, you know, who are trying to save as much as they possibly can. But when they look at the rate the prices are increasing, or they speak to their mortgage broker or their bank to update their borrowing capacity and realize that, you know, that's their rate of savings being outpaced by the rate of the prices going up.
Yeah.
That's also an issue, right? So it's not only a matter of, you know, cutting back on, say, overseas holidays, right? But it's multiple factors. And I think that makes it very frustrating for people that they feel there's not much I can personally control for me to get closer to that goal of owning a property that I want to buy.
But I won't say sad, because each to their own, right? And I don't hear a lot of people talking about this. So, and it's just a gut feel. But I think a lot of people are saying, oh, you know what? Stuff it. I'm not going to ever be able to buy a house. I'm going on holidays. I'm buying 16 lattes. I'm doing all these things. I'm never going to
live life. Like, you're not going to consider.
I'm going to live life. I'm going to live life.
So they're not saving for anything in particular.
But I think that's dangerous, because I think at a point in that person's lives, they're going to say, oh, hey, I actually do want to buy something, or I want to live somewhere, or I want a roof over my head that I own. I think there is a switch, and it goes back to the 30-year-old mate who's like, all of a sudden it's become a priority. So I think it might be dangerous to have no consideration at all. And I'm seeing this a lot, like, oh no, let's just live in a tent and go on holidays and live life to the fullest, which, man, I would love to travel every year and stuff as well. But it's a dangerous mentality, because I think the mindset will change, and I base that on pure gut feel.
I mean, you bought your house in the 20s. I bought my house in my 20s. You also did as well. Yeah. We know that the average age, I mean, from what we all do together, we know that the average age is, 36 of a first home buyer. So that has increased substantially in the last 10, well, but even in the last 10 years, it's gone up. Again, I bought my house for $292,000. That same property is worth around $1 million today. That's only 10 years. So if they say property doubles every 10 years or so, that's say 10 to 12 years that property it has tripled, right? So I can actually understand why people find it so, number one, so daunting, but why it is so difficult. And then we also know from what we do in our professional lives that it takes anywhere from 6 to 10 years to save for a deposit. Now, if you're sitting at the age of 20 thinking, okay, I've got to save, let's call it 10 years. I've got to save 10 years to buy this property. So I'm going to save from 20 all the way out to 30. And so long as everything goes right, so I keep my job, I keep saving, I'm very disciplined.
Prices don't go up.
Prices don't go up too much. I can achieve home ownership. I think that's a long time for people, and maybe they just don't want to commit to that.
It's scary though too, because
Then you got the 30-year mortgage to tack onto the back of that, right? So it's not just save and then.
Yeah.
It is a lifetime commitment.
Yeah.
So I get it.
What's hard is, like you said earlier, Jace, whenever you purchase a property, you always think, oh, that was expensive. And it's very hard to see prices being more than what they currently are today, no matter if it was 1970, 1996 or 2023. It's very hard to see these average price in Sydney 1.2, 1.3 million. It can't possibly be more than that. And we don't. The truth is, we don't know if it will be. We only know what history suggests, but it's hard to. It's easy in hindsight to go, man, I should have bought when it was $500,000. And it's scary to think that there'll be people saying the same thing in 10 years, which they will. In 10 years' time, they'll say, man, I wish I bought when it was 1.3. So it sounds ridiculous as I say it, but we don't know. If anyone can predict the future, let us know.
Oh, please.
Yeah.
I'd love that.
Because I think it just overall shows that there's so many factors that's causing this delayed or this mindset that owning a property is really difficult, right? And going back to what you were saying, Chris, when you're buying at a younger age, it's actually a lot easier too. Because at that time you might not have a family and you're not thinking about buying a property that you're going to raise your kids in.
It might be a bit more naive too, and you just like we all did, we just ran into it and then figured it out as we went. Whereas maybe if I had known that I had to make the pool compliant and the builder was going to go bankrupt on me at the time, or there's going to be issues with the house, maybe I wouldn't have done that decision. But
the naivety was our secret ingredient, by the sounds of things. It's
the common denominator.
A bit scary.
All right, guys. Well, before we wrap it up, I wanted to say, see if you had one bit of advice for prospective first-home buyers, aka me, what would it be? One juicy pearl of wisdom that you can impart.
All right. Oh, I think this is a difficult one because everyone's situation is different, right? Yeah. I think just do you.
Yeah.
Is my advice is that there's a lot of noise in the media. There's a lot of noise everywhere around what you need to do, this and that. But I think ultimately, you will know best, right? Arm yourself with the information and the education, right? And you do you.
Love it.
Yeah.
I love that. I think even if you just have the aspiration for home ownership, that's probably enough right now. If you've got the aspirations that you want to be a homeowner, that's the first part of what you need. That's the first ingredient to want to be getting onto the property ladder. So having the aspirations is tick number one. And if you do have those aspirations, you need to speak to a lot of the good people around you that have probably done it and try and get some great advice. Remove the noise. I know we're duplicating a few things here, but remove the noise that is probably scaring you or stopping you from getting to the property market, and really research where you want to be. Try and start to be in a really affordable location if it's your first property. If you're wanting to buy that property but you're looking straight for that $2 or $3 million house, for example, where you've got your heart set on that, you may need a few stepping stones in between that to get to that long-term goal. That's my one piece of advice.
On top of that, I'd say have a plan. So have that intent. I think that's actually really good advice, Chris. But have a plan. Think about where you want to be in 5, 10, 20 years with this decision, because it has to be long-term, right? You're saying purchasing 2010, Jace, and then now it's worth X. You can't grow that equity without time. So you got to be prepared to take that time and have a plan for it. I think that's what I'd tell 20-year-old Michael.
Tell your kids. Yeah.
They hear it all the time.
Lucky.
Yeah, they're lucky kids.
That's good. All right. Thank you so much, guys. And thank you for listening to Property Now. Make sure you're subscribed so that you never miss an episode. And if you wanted to share your first property purchase story with us, we would love to hear it. So let us know in the comments. All right. Thanks, guys. Oh, I stuttered. Thanks, guys.
Mad.
That's a wrap.
Cool. Nice work, guys.
The Property Now podcast offers opinions on Australian property news for informational and entertainment purposes only, and they are general in nature. It does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. It does not constitute professional advice. Always seek expert guidance before making any property-related decisions.